Charles De Lauzirika, the restoration producer for the final cut. And sorry, what was that?
And Dangerous Days.
Oh, and Dangerous Days, sorry.
Okay.
Okay, and yep, Dangerous Days, the best 3.5-hour documentary ever done. And I've written a thing or two about the film, and I was there when it was being made. I'm Paul Sammon. Okay, before we get into the whole presentation business, how many people want to do a Q&A? How many people are into asking questions? Yeah, you raise your hands, that's cool. Give me an idea. Okay, because we've got so much to blast through here, so I'm going to go fairly quickly, and then we'll jump in and we'll do some things and we'll talk and all that, but then we want to have questions too. So if I seem to be moving fast, that's why. So there we go, the great eye, the great Blade Runner eye to start with. What was interesting about the film, when I asked Ridley, this originally was supposed to be Holden's eye. If I gather everyone's seen the movie? Okay, I don't have to explain everything. Okay. This was originally supposed to be Holden's eye, but then Ridley got the idea that this movie was about paranoia. And he said, I want to have a shot that opens up with the movie looking back at the audience. So that's what the audience. One of the things. Okay, and here's the famous, John Alden one sheet when it first came out. And there's the iconic shot of the geisha. And if you've read my book or if you've read online about it, you know it's birth control pills that she's taking. Yeah, it's just not ever said that was actually the intent of it. And Ridley said, by the way, that the illuminated squares on this that make up the side of the building, now you go outside now and you see these everywhere, right? Yeah. But this is like 40 years ago. And he said that they were 10 feet by 10 feet, each one of those illuminated squares. So that gives you an idea what the scale was supposed to be. And here's, we're going to get me out of the way real fast, but this is the one that I did the first double issue of Cinefantastique on the film in 1982. I was virtually there through the entire pre-production principle with special effects, post, all the previews. I was sort of embedded with the movie, and that was the first thing I wrote. And then this is the first edition of Feature Blog. This is the one that came out in 1996, the first edition, and simultaneously with the British edition, and then later the Italian edition, and then the Japanese edition, of which there have been two. And let's have a contest. Let's obviously see how many times I get to salve my own ego through this. That's not going to be the only time. This is the second edition. This is the one that was only published in the UK as a hardcover. And it's completely different from the first and the third editions. And this is the third edition that's now available still as a hard copy and as a Kindle, as a download on Amazon. And that's me from 1981. My head is cooler. But the funny thing is, David and I were just talking about how everyone looked like that, right, in the art department, with beards and a lot of hair.
Yes, I thought you were in the art department.
I'm right in front of a charcoal. That's Mentor Huebner's original drawing. That was hanging in the art department. And that was supposed to be an unused opening where Deckard comes into the city and he's in a traffic jam. And he goes up to this building, and it's a kind of like a landing pad for the spinner. And they take him to police headquarters. And Philip K. Dick, and we're going to let these other people talk in a second, these two. But Philip K. Dick, of course, started the whole thing with Joanne George's Dream of Electric Sheep. And I knew Phil Dick from 1973 until 82, and I talked to him for the last time 9 days before he died. And Charlie, when he did the special edition DVDs in 2007, was kind enough to allow me to do about a 30-minute condensed version of all the interviews I did with Phil. So if you can find those, and it's also on the internet. Hampton Fancher, the actor turned producer who really got the ball started with getting things onto the screen from Joanne George's Dream of Electric Sheep. Brian Kelly, who's the other producer, who had done, of course, Flipper. And Michael Daly, the English producer who always had Ridley's back on a very contentious film. And here's the guy who, depending on your point of view, was very controversial man named Bud Yorkin. Cue the crickets. If you read my book, you know Bud was the guy who was one of the completion bond character. Would you like to explain how that worked, David? I'm not going to put you on the spot.
Completion bond?
Yeah,
It's
go
an
ahead.
insurance
Yeah, go ahead.
contract that guarantees the film will be finished. So, because they guaranteed the film themselves instead of going to a company that's in the business of that, they were on the hook to finish the film. And therefore, after some sad previews, decided to take the film away from Ridley and Michael and do something with themselves, which they failed at. And then finally they said, you guys better come back and finish the film.
Yeah, they actually fired Ridley and Michael Daly. And that did not work. And they, the cooler heads prevailed, and they came. These cooler heads said, "You can't fire the producer and the director before the film is done." Now who's going to finish it? You guys. I mean, you weren't there. And it was a very controversial and contentious relationship. It's well known. The crew used to call this movie Blood Runner. I heard that one more than once. And here's Ridley, of course, fresh off of the Alien, Ridley Scott in his youth with his fire.
He's not on fire, it's just the lighting.
And this is a shot I took of him the very first day I met Ridley. And I was introduced to him in pre-production very early. Michael Daly said, go in and talk to Ridley and say how you get along. And I went in to just say hi, and 3 hours later, I left his office. Ridley is a very intelligent and articulate guy. And also, David, didn't you say he was very funny? He had a really good sense of
I
humor.
don't know why, but no one ever seems to talk about his sense of humor, because he did have one. In the early days of pre-production, we'd go location scouting, and we'd be in abandoned buildings with flashlights, dark tunnels, and he would go run from the group of us and hide behind the column, and as we were lost walking around, he'd jump out, scream like a monster, and scare the heck out of us. 18 years of age.
And Charlie, you worked with Ridley, pretty closely for years, in a variety of capacities. What was it like working with him on the final cut?
It was a combination of joy and terror, basically, because I didn't want to screw it up, and I felt like if I screwed it up, I would be shamed for the rest of my life. So basically, it was really fun and creative to work with him in putting together the kind of like the rough elements of what would be the final cut, then go off for months and work with that with the team at Warner Brothers and the various visual effects houses, and then come back and have him every now and then stop in to like approve or give us thoughts and comments. So on the final cut, it was great because he would only come when stuff was good. You know, all the in-between times, I'm glad he wasn't there.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm going to do it right now, but I think Charlie really deserves a big round. And I say this without condescension, but all of you, the collective you, have no idea the work and the detail and the hard road that Charlie hoed to get that done. Really, a remarkable achievement. So,
But it was tough, but it was fun. It just took a long time. That was the marathon of it. But it was a fun, kind of like a really creatively stimulating time. Like every day, going through boxes and boxes of Blade Runner footage that had been lost for years and even decades. It was like Christmas morning every single day. Just to open these boxes, like here's a scene I didn't even know existed, and it was wonderful. It was intoxicating.
here's some of Ridley Grahams, and everyone's familiar with these. Ridley trained as a graphic artist originally. He was at the Royal College of Art. Same class as David Hockney, for those of you who are into fine art. So that gives you an idea of his skill level. And he really started in the BBC as kind of as an art director, and then a production designer, and then director for things like Z-Cars and some of the early 60s things there. Adam, which was like a really popular show. Then he segued over into commercials for 10 years with his brother Tony, before he did The Duelist in 1977, which is his first film. And he's always been really good. The Ridley Grams, he just like, instead of talking, he'll just sketch real fast and this is where I went, you know. And there are so many Ridley Grams out there. But this is Mentor Huebner. This is one of the pre-production concept art things. And you can see this one really leans into the film noir tropes of the expressionistic shadows and the dark, you know, lighting. From the very beginning, Ridley said that he wanted to do a film noir 40 years in the future, which then would be Los Angeles 2019, which, by the way, it looks a lot like, you know, what they were thinking of. And here's some special effects storyboards by Tom Crenna. It was the whole sequence where the spinner was supposed to, when they go to Tyrell's pyramid, they were supposed to land in a garden on the top, but they never shot that. But this is the beginnings of that. This shows what it was supposed to look like. Here's some Sherman Labby, who is another fellow, a very famous storyboard and pre-production artist, long history. These are all sequences that were not used in the film. Openings, but down there at the bottom with the jaw, that's the original opening, one of them for Blade Runner, that now opens Blade Runner 2049, where, you know, Kay goes down to the farm and meets Sapper and shoots him with a suit. That was all written. And instead of him pulling the eyeball out, which he does now in 2049, he pulled the jaw out and it had a Tyrell stamp on it. So they used it. They used this opening from Blade Runner for Blade Runner 2049. And here's another one, Mentor Huebner. This was unused. This was supposed to be in Deckard's bathtub. And this is Rachel when she was still a blonde before she became a brunette. And here's Tom Southwell. And Tom Southwell did a lot of the graphics for the film. And, you know, David, maybe you could walk us through, before we get into Sydney, you know, what was like the breakdown there in the art department on Blade Runner? I mean, you had Larry Paul, you had you had Tom Southwell. How did that all work out?
Well, I came into the picture during the Screen Actors Guild strike, and I was working on another film at Universal called Zoot Suit, and they shut down during the strike. And I was working on a pilot for The Greatest American Hero, and they shut down. And Larry Paul, who's the production designer of Blade Runner and many other films like Back to the Future, he called me up, and we had been friends, and I had worked with him before. But the mistake he made in the beginning was he got a show for me to do on my own as the production designer. It was Taylor Hackford's first film, and he said, okay, you're on your own now. So when he called me up to do Blade Runner, I said, I don't want to be the second guy anymore. I want to do my own shows. So after the first picture shut down, I had less money. And after the second picture shut down, I even had less money. And I called Larry up and said, you know, maybe it's a good idea if I come and work with you on this thing called Dangerous Days. And he said, listen, man, I'm not looking for an assistant. I need a partner because this is overwhelming. And I said, okay, I'll do it. So I went into the studio, and he brought me in to meet Ridley Scott. And he said, Ridley, this is David. He's going to be the art director. And Ridley stood up and took his cigar out of his mouth and said, too bad for you, chap. So basically, Larry and I, you know, had to take the information that was given long before I got there, and that is the Sid Mead illustrations and paintings, and this stuff from heavy metal, and that was sort of the way we were going to go. And the idea was, because Ridley was an art director himself, he was sort of the, you know, the executive production designer of the film. Let's face it, you know, he was the guy. So the job was for Larry to have the whole concept of the film into one piece of work. And my job was to get it done. And that means to take pieces of paper and beautiful paintings and drawings and renderings, and 400 people to build everything over a brief period at the Warner Brothers studio and the locations. So it was a different job for me than I thought it would be. I thought I would just do that. But then Ridley decided that he liked me And I couldn't go home, ever. I'd be all day long with the construction crew, and at night I'd be on the set. Of course, this is just during the 85 days it took to shoot it, 35, which were all nice. And that was my job, was to be the re-art director, because everything that we designed and built was constructed and decorated and propped, and then we'd get to the set and Ridley would look through the lens, brilliant eye that he has, and change everything, and it was my job to get it done. Usually in the middle of the night. So that was a challenge, but then again, it was his third movie, and it was my third movie, so we both were like, you know, his first movie in Hollywood. And so it seemed like we got along, and the thing was, you're either with me or you're not. And so a lot of people had to go away in the beginning who didn't get in step. And I just said, well, this is the guy that directed Alien, he must be right. So I never questioned anything he did. And when I did question it, he would generally say to me, don't rationalize with me. This is not architecture, this is a movie. We can do anything we want.
Yeah, I agree with that. You know, that was one of the things that struck me during that 3-hour conversation I had along with him, was his laser focus. And he also was very funny, as David just said, has a great sense of humor. But what really struck me was that he knew exactly what he wanted, but what he wanted would change every nanosecond. And I remember clearly David and his people, like literally before shots, having to move things around, put things in, or flip things over, or, you know, and it was just like, how is this bad, you know, and then they'd shoot it. And it was all because Ridley was almost, well, I'd say always right. And, you know, he was a hard taskmaster. But if you were on his wavelength, and if you could keep up with him, it was easy, you know, relatively speaking. Let's get back to Sid Mead. Sid, of course, at this point in his life was a very internationally renowned international electronics designer, illustrator, automotive, you know, designer, you name it, he had done it all. And Ridley saw a book called Sentinel, which I've seen is on sale, or was on sale in one of the dealers' tables down there, some original copies of it. Sid was, you know, a futurist, and what he did when he worked in Detroit and Ford for the Advanced Concepts division, and he would design future cars, but not only design the cars, design the environment around them. And so that's what you're seeing here. These are his paintings, and he, you know, Ridley says, well, let's get some future cars in here, blah, 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 because of the script, the spinners. Sid comes in and he does cars, but Ridley sees all these other things that he's doing and goes, oh, F me. That was one of his favorite expressions. And that was when he was in a good mood. If you heard that, in a good mood, that meant he was happy with you. He said, well, let's do other things. And before you knew it, Sid really had an expanded job. But he was also getting in his car and driving over the hill down to Disney and working at Tron at the same time. Yeah, so he's doing both of them at one point. That was really fascinating. Of course, there's the spinner that we saw. This is Decker's car, his sedan, an early, you know, draft of it. It was supposed to be a decommissioned spinner. Here is a rough of the first thing with the spinner. It's hard to see, but right here on the struts in front of the cockpit were supposed to be 50 caliber machine guns. I remember someone telling me that. And some more Sid art. And this one, we were just talking about it. We don't know who did this one.
I've never seen it before.
Yeah, but there was so much art being generated and so much material at this furious pace that, you know, this was one of the early designs for one of the spinners. And here's the spinner in action. And then we get to the guy who winds up being Deckard. And Harrison Ford. Now, Harrison, being a little too familiar. Harrison was not what people think. This is me. This is my ego time. Remember I said I was... Feel free to just get sick of my ego boo here. But yeah, Harrison is very funny, and he's got a silly side to him. And he would play practical jokes and do stuff all the time. But he's also snapped right into character. He was kind of like the consummate professional. And here he is, made up as Rick Deckard with that signature kind of outfit that he had on. and this thing called the blaster, which became the iconic prop from this film. I mean, this thing is everywhere, and there have been so many versions of the blaster over the years. I've got like 12 or 13 of them. And it was obvious, for those of you who know, it was essentially a rifle, an Austrian rifle, that they had taken what they call the receiver part, that Ivor Powell, who was the associate producer in Ridley, had actually found during a wreck, you know, like a location scout in a junk shop. And he really liked the double trigger assembly, Ridley did. And then they put a Bulldog, Charter Arms Bulldog, Magnum at the bottom of it. And so it's actually two different things with a fake handle on it. And then we have Rutger Hauer, who, you know, Rutger, who is really the soul of the movie. Did anyone notice how many people died in 2019 from Blade Runner? It was really strange. Sidney died in Blade, 2019. Rutger died in 2019. Larry Paul, yeah, the production designer in 2019. It was like, woo, you know, it was kind of sad. Oh gosh, here I am again. It's time with Rutger. This is when they had the Blade Runner Day at the British Film Institute in London in 2009. And really got like an knighthood or something there during that day. Rutger was a lot of fun, but he was a real mischievous guy. And of course, I'm running through this so we give you guys time for a Q&A. But here's Sean Young, obviously, as Rachel. And you know, you always see the iconic shots of her. How about that shot? That's Sean. And that's like in the scene where she was in bed, you know, at the very end, he thinks she's dead. That's how she looked. And Stephen Vaughn, who was the just really talented still photographer that they had on Blade Runner, who also shot things like Starship Troopers and many other shows, would just grab these shots. And
he also passed away in 2019.
That's right, he also passed in 2019, you know. But Sean, exceptionally beautiful, and a town filled with like lovely people, like a real standout. And oh gosh, there I am again. Anyway, here we have I wish we had somebody from the model department here, but this thing, you know, the Hades landscape that everyone sees at the beginning of the film with the Tyrell Pyramid was really under the general supervision of Douglas Trumbull, who was EEG, effects group. But Mark Stetson was the guy who was in charge of the model department. And here's how they shot that. That is the Hades landscape. And it was all like in an enclosed environment that they could smoke, and they had motion control cameras and long exposures, and they threaded individual thousands and thousands of feet of little tiny fiber optic dots of light. It took them days to do that. There's Doug as the Tyrell Pyramid model is being built. It was foam core and, as I recall, copper and brass etched plating. And here was a reunion in 2019 of the Blade Runner model department, and David's in this shot.
And
right?
the art department.
And the art department, yep. I'm in the shot. Rocco Giaffi, who did some of the matte paintings, Mark Stetson, all kinds of people. Brian James, who left us way too soon, long before 2019. And here's the shot that they never used. They were supposed to be a point of view shot through the Voight Kampf machine, looking at Brian, and they started that, but they dropped it. The blimp, the crazy, crazy blimp, based on Ridley's memories of being a child in World War II and the observation balloons that they had all over London to stop the B-2s from coming in. That's where that comes from. There they are building it in the model department. And we get to the noodle bar, the White Dragon. David, White Dragon story.
Oh, the White Dragon. Well, the night that we were shooting that scene, which you all remember, the famous shot of Harrison Ford reading the newspaper. Spent a lot of talk about newspapers in 2019. And he gets up and he goes to the noodle bar. Well, there I am, and I've got some grip people, maybe one or two construction people because they're on the day shift. So Ridley lines up the shot with Jordan Cronenwith, and he says to me, I'm gonna shoot the scene from this angle. And I said, well, I don't know how you can do that because there's a column there. it's holding up the roof of the White Dragon. So me talking about architecture and him talking about movies, I'm talking engineering. He said, go figure it out. So he said, the column's gotta go because this is where the camera's gonna go. So I get the special effects guys, we bring in a crane and have a steel cable connected to the roof of the White Dragon, and the chainsaw came in and chopped the column right out. And then for other shots, we put it back in, so it was here, and there, and there. But in any event, it's the angle that he wanted, and he said, it's your job, figure it out. So that's why you have the great angle on Harrison Ford getting his food. Otherwise, it would have been this side or that side of the couch, and I completely understood. And they were willing to wait, because everything is money and time. And so I'll say, I'll do anything you want me to do within reason. And it's going to take some time. And Michael Beasley would come along and say, take your time. So that's why you see all that texture. That's why you see it the way it is, because we were given the opportunity, well, not always, and the time reserved to do that. And that's why that shot looks like it does.
Yeah, and so the next time you see the film, just think of a big construction crane actually holding it so it doesn't fall on Harrison Ford's head.
I said, I'm going to fall down. He said, fix it.
Yeah, what you just said, you figure it out. Ridley said that a lot. We can't do it this way, you figure it out. Boom, you go off.
No, that's true. And I would ask him, I said, okay, we're going to change here. What do you want me to do? He said, you're the art director. Figure it out. Go back to the camera.
Eddie Olmos, of course, is Gaff, and City Speak, which was kind of in the script, that mishmash of different languages. Eddie actually came up with the substance of that. He went to the Berlitz School of Languages in downtown LA and studied like 4 or 5 different languages. And for those of you who are really into it, when he's saying "lofa," that's horse dick in Hungarian. Anyway, so of course he takes them into, across that beautiful cityscape, and we see the other ones like the lobster spinner and the Ferrari spinner and all these different models. And there's Tom, it's not Tom Pock.
Bill George.
Yeah, Bill George, thank you. That's Bill George from the model shop, starting the hero model. Hero model is a prop, of course, that is closest to the camera, the one that really works, and then the ones that are kind of like the stand-in props or the rubber props, like guns, like blasters. There were a lot of rubber blasters, but really only 1 or 2 heroes. Gene Winfield, this is while they were making the full-scale spinner back in 1981, so this is like over 40 years old. And there I am again, gosh. This is Gene Winfield restoring the spinner, and Charlie is going to show up later with this.
Oh, I'm going to have a picture in this?
You got a picture in
wow.
this. But they restored that spinner, and here, of course, they're landing in Union Station with Emmett Walsh, Ian Walsh, great guy. Joe Turkel, who also just unfortunately passed. And, in the book, I talk about how Joe, in the first edition, how he needed to use cue cards because he couldn't remember the dialogue. Also in the first edition, I wasn't able to find Joe Turkel because he had retired and he didn't have an agent anymore, and he had just vanished. And I found over 100 some people, and Joe couldn't believe for years that I couldn't find him. He was very angry with me. And so we finally kind of made up. And I said, Joe, really, you got to talk about the character. So in the last edition of the book, he does. And you know why he was having trouble having dialogue? He had his mother and his father living in the apartment that he lived in, who had just moved in with him during Blade Runner. And apparently, and he talks about this in the book, they had a very troubled relationship when he was a kid. And he was under all this psychological pressure. And he said he never blew, to me, he said he never blew as many lines of dialogue as he did on Blade Runner, because his past was haunting him every time he came to the set. But on a lighter note, he said that Ridley told him, he said, you can do whatever you want with this character. I'm not going to tell you how to play it. Joe said, this guy is both a megalomaniac, we're talking about Tyrell, both a megalomaniac and very weird. And so I'm going to play him as someone who is like so egotistical, he thinks he's the smartest man on the planet. And when Deckard first comes to BK Rachel, what he said, I walked out on the set thinking was, I made this woman. I literally created this woman. And who's this policeman who's coming in to talk to my woman? And he said that started the wheels turning. And he said from then on, he said he always had a smirk. And I thought that was an interesting way to play it. And here, of course, is Rachel. Sean was here earlier. Has anyone seen her at the con? She was here like Thursday for a while. Yeah. Anyway, and there's the VK machine designed by Sid. And you remember the replicant eye glow. Here's how they did it, one of the ways. There's the mirror bounce that they did during production. And this is the sketches originally. Here's the scene that was cut from the original, which is the Cairo. This is where Holden is still alive and he's in a sarcophagus. And Deckard goes to get some clues from him. Then we're introduced, of course, to Rutger on the Chinatown set, which was a beautiful, beautiful set. And lots of neon on that too. Charlie, when you were going back through the final cut, there was a lot of, did you have to do color grading and color correcting and all that? Because there's so much neon and so many different, like, for instance, in Sebastian's workshop, there was that pink glow and all that. Could you talk about, a little bit about, like, what you have to do to bring things back to where they were or what they were originally?
Yeah, well, the thing is, Ridley never really had an official final pass on the color of the film, like all these years. And even with the 92 director's cut, which I know Paul would like to call the so-called director's cut, because he really was not super involved in that. But in 2006 and 7, when we were working on the final cut, he finally did get pretty much everything he wanted. He got the cut that he wanted, he got the sound mix, and the color. We spent a lot of time on the color. And one funny little story, which I've never told before, is the opening Hades landscape scene. Ridley was making American Gangster around that time, and he was in very desaturated mode. And Blade Runner is a very saturated movie in terms of color. He almost made it black and white, except for the fireballs. The fireballs he kept blazing orange, just like fire.
He took all the color?
He put it pretty much. It looked like Sin City. It was like very strange.
Interesting.
And I remember texting Paul Frischman, like, he's ruining the movie. I was freaking out. But fortunately, he came back around and it was, back to closer to normal. But the final cut represents his final pass in color for sure.
Yeah, for many years, having been fortunate enough to see what they called the work print, which was the sneak preview prints that they had in May in Denver and Dallas in 1992. That was my favorite version of the movie, and that's different from the final cut. But the work print is the one that really, in a lot of ways, is the closest to the final cut. But now, after seeing virtually all of these cuts we talked about, plus there's 2 or 3 I didn't even put in the book, I am 100% behind the final cut. The final cut is the definitive thing, okay? I know some people love the theatrical version with the voiceover. Now, there's a funny story you can say, because do you remember what happened in 2005 when Ridley said, I'll get an A-list writer and go to Harrison Ford? Yeah, tell that story.
No, Ridley thought that he could fix the narration with more narration, or new narration, and bring Harrison back. And I think, again, with the censored version, I believe Harrison said no effing way. But they were friendly at that point. It's like they had a bit of tension making the film, but they were friendly at that point, and it was just more of a joke, like, I'm not doing this in a way. Because I think Harrison, was against it from day one in terms of having narration. And I have to say, though, I want, and you will debunk this myth with me, Harrison did not deliberately sabotage the voiceover. He showed up to work, he showed up to do the best job he could. He says that in Dangerous Days. And I've heard all of his voiceover, like the raw recordings of the voiceover, and he's trying like hell to make it work. So there's none of this like, he phoned it in, he made it intentionally, flat. He really tried to make it work.
Yeah, and again, I was around when that was happening, and Katie Haber and Michael Daly and Roland Kidby, who was the writer for the final narration that you hear in the theatrical cut, were all in like this little soundstage together, a recording booth. And Harrison did not, he just kept trying to do, and he told me, he said, well, how can I put this nicely? And Harrison told me, he says, well, if you have to say shit, it's going to sound like shit. That was the nice version. But yeah, the writing on it was very poor, and it just got worse and worse and worse, you know. And so really, let's lay that myth to rest. Please go online. Harrison Ford did not intentionally blow the narration on the theatrical cut. He tried. He just had to work with what he had. Okay, James Hong, who was just in Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. Who all saw that? Yeah. With all due respect to Spider-Man and Doctor Strange, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once is my favorite multiverse movie. Oh, who's that guy again? Jim Hong. I've always loved this shot of Pris because it's so wonderful. It's like a living doll with a real doll, right? It's really an interesting shot. And Pris was, of course, Daryl Hannah was like, what, 19, 20 when she did it, something like that. Yeah. Oh, and Rutger was her protector. Rutger took her under his wing, and not in a provocative sense, but he was actually very, avuncular towards her, very protective. And William Sanderson was a lot of fun. He's an eccentric, shy, gentle guy, but a nice man, and also very, very, very talented. But Marvin Westmore did this makeup to age him, and it took hours. And here's some iconic shots. Oh, here's Sebastian's workshop behind the scenes. And oh, there was a miniature, I've said this in the book, but there was actually a miniature landscape in that. A 3D, when Pris looks in, there's actually like little tiny people moving around and trees and all this, like a mechanical type of thing. And they were supposed to do an insert, but they never did it. And here's Kevin Hall as the Kaiser. And there's Marvin Westmore making him up behind the scenes. There they are, the bear and the Kaiser with their heads off, John Edward Allen and Kevin. And of course, there's the famous unicorn scene coming up when he has the daydream. And there's the real shot that Charlie found, because in the director's cut, when they reinserted it, they used this one, which was not the original shot that they put in the original work print. Or actually, it wasn't in the work print, the one that they had that no one ever saw, except me and a few other people. And Charlie, do you want to talk about that story, finding that? You had to find that footage.
Yeah, well, we had really rough, beat-up work print of that scene and other deleted scenes and other lost footage, but we didn't have access to the negative, which we would have needed to really make it clean and super high resolution. So finally, after the deal was made between Warner Brothers and the Blade Runner partnership, which was Bud Yorkin and Jerry Perenchio, we got access to everything that still existed, and then we were able to better restore that to the original cut of the unicorn scene, because in the director's cut, it's an outtake. We found the original scene that Terry Rawlings edited together, which has
this one's the original.
Yeah, which and there's even more before that of the unicorn just kind of like wandering into the shot and running. But we found endless amounts of footage of the unicorn being filmed. But we have a slate that says Blade Runner on it, not Legend. It says Blade Runner. It was filmed for Blade Runner, so another myth to kill.
Yes.
But we found so much unicorn footage, and strangely, there was a lot of footage of the horses trying to mount each other. And there was so much of it, we called it uniporn. It was crazy. And then we also had to fix in the final cut, the unicorn's horns kind of a little wobbly, so we stabilized that in the final cut.
Well, Charlie, you just made the internet ablaze with unicorn.
Hashtag unicorn.
Hashtag unicorn. Okay, and of course here's Decker's apartment. These chairs, by the way, the art department was on the scavenging hunt, and they found a disco where they were throwing the furniture out. And this was actually in the alley, and they said, "Can we have these?" And they said, "Yeah," and they brought them to the set. So this is like used 10 minutes. Come on now, wait a minute. You got, I don't know.
They've seen the movies.
I didn't see that. All right. Anyway, disco stuff. This is the photo. This is when you recreated it for the final cut. We put in
Brought Joanna in.
Joanna Cassidy instead of the stand-in they had. Anna Moyd Rose, stuff that got cut out and now back in the final cut. Joanna Cassidy is Zora, and here she is with her own snake, which was Darling, a Burmese python. And here's a really good shot. This is not usually seen. This is just before they shot it. And that's, you want to say this, David? This is.
Yes, it's called Last Looks, when the makeup department and the set decorator and the prop person scurry around trying to get everything as perfect as they can, because we just keep working until they throw us out, because the art department is notorious for wanting to not ever give up the set to the camera department until the AD comes in and says, okay, get out of here, you're done. So Linda DeSena, who is not with us at this moment, she is a 4-time Academy Award nominated set decorator and production designer on her own. And I have to give a lot of credit, because we built sets, and of course we all know what construction is like. But if you looked at a real estate catalog and you saw a house for sale and empty rooms, well, basically everything that you actually see on the final layer comes from set decoration. And so she gets as much credit as all of us. And of course, when we were nominated, she was also considered as a nominee for Best Art Direction.
And you and she and who else are going to be doing a screening of Blade Runner up in LA on Tuesday?
Mark Stetson, who was the model supervisor on that film, and myself and Linda are going to run the film at the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Science in the new museum. We've been invited, so on Tuesday we're going to be there, and this is a rehearsal.
Okay, look, I want to get to the Q&A, so here we go. Here goes shot. Oh,
Hey, who's that?
This is Charlie's only picture that
I know, no, I was stopping there. There! Ta-da!
Oh, yay!
Thank you for stopping my too rapidly punching finger there. Yep, and then costumes, Top Southwell stuff. We're getting to your Q&As, folks. Oh, I better squish. Oh, I don't want to be killed in this picture. Please let me have an extra shot. No. Oh, Rucker didn't want to do this shot. He thought it was silly. Really convinced him. He said it'll work, and it did. The rolling set outside. Oh, Matthew Urchich doing the matte paintings, who was assisted by Rocco Joffrey. This was done at the last second. David put those things, the fans there, literally just before the shot. Matte painting, yes, like, okay, we'll grab you. Oh, look, we're hanging by the side of the building. Here we are.
You should have been doing it this way from the beginning.
I'm getting there. Harrison goofing, and of course the wonderful Tears and Rain speech, which Rutger partially improvised. Charlie supervised for the final cut the replacement of the original background, which was nice. Very
worst shot in the original movie.
Yeah, it was, yeah. And then, Eddie Olmos's dialogue originally here was, "You've done a man's work, sir, but it's getting hard to tell who's a man around here." And
It was this. It was like, are you sure you really are a man? It's tough to tell who's who around.
Yeah, it's hard to tell who's man around here. And then, of course, Saving Rachel, let's go. Oh, great story here. Right after he finds this, I was there on the set, and there was a constant tension between Ridley and Harrison about him being a replicant. Harrison never wanted to be a replicant. Ridley kind of wanted him to be, and said, okay, we'll make him not, but he was secretly going and making him a replicant. And when they got to this shot, Harrison actually crumbled the unicorn and said, "God damn it, you're still trying to make me a replicant, aren't you?" Anyway, the unicorn Vangelis, surrounded by his banks of yes. Varying bootlegs of the Blade Runner soundtrack, the official Blade Runner City Speak, the first fanzine that came out, and the immemorial Criterion Collection, some books that have been done on Ridley, and let's just keep reading about future Noir and Blade Runner. And here are the two men most responsible for it, Ridley Scott and Philip K. Dick. And there we go. All right, come on, let's go. Chain the doors. Okay, go.
Hi, there was a
called Slice of Life. Have you seen it? And do you have any comments about?
Slice of Life, Kickstarter film. Have we seen it?
I believe I saw it a long time ago, and I remember liking it. I don't have an instant recall of it, but I remember liking it.
Came out a couple 3 years ago, I think, but it was a lovely little film in the universe, and I was just curious if you had any comments.
It's one of many fan films. It's in the wake of Blade Runner, including a roughly 2-hour version. I never got that one. But yeah, it's great.
Thank you.
Oh, and by the way, just to know, we are going to do an autograph session over in the Sales Pavilion right after this, so then we can talk more, okay, if you have any questions. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so I have a question. So 2049, what were your input sought for this? And what do you think about it? And then, you know, if there's like a follow-up to that movie.
Very few people who worked on the original Blade Runner had any input on 2049. I personally thought it was a magnificent job. I really love the film. It's a little over long. I can think of places where it can be cut. But I thought it was not only worthy, but I thought it was a good and, in fact, a great piece of science fiction. How about you guys?
I was documenting the sequel. I won't say 2049 because it was when Ridley was still the director, but I started documenting it. I got some amazing footage of the writing of the script between Ridley and Hampton Fancher. And I might have suggested something that might have ended up in the film in a certain way, and I'm going to save that for my memoirs, but yeah. I was, very briefly in the beginning. The footage was great, but I hope someone gets to see it someday.
I love the movie. I thought it was an extension of some of the things that we didn't do, and of course, they had a bigger toolbox. They had more effects abilities. But the idea is when it opened up with the scene that was supposed to be the opening of our film, the farm scene, that was written at the time when Dustin Hoffman was going to play the role. And so I laughed out loud when I saw the scene and people thought it was crazy. It's just like, hey, there's that scene that was cut from the first film. So if you want to think about it, Godfather Part 1 and Godfather Part 2, that's where it is to me. It's,
Right, that's a good point.
Great analogy. Okay, thank you.
Hi, can you briefly talk about the collaboration between Vangelis and Ridley on creating this magnificent score?
The score?
Yeah.
Well, it was interesting because a lot of it was recorded at night at his studio in London near Marble Arch. And Ridley, Joanna Cassidy, Katie Haber, a couple of other people. And Vangelis, there's a thing called a click track in Hollywood where you actually, the orchestra, well, they don't use orchestras at all hardly anymore. It's a guy at home with a synth bank or, like a laptop. But back then, you had these things that would be projected on a wall, and there'd be like a line, and it would click, and that meant that was the cue that they would do the orchestration to. So they had it like lined up for that particular shot. Vangelis didn't do that. Vangelis improvised. They would show whole scenes, and he would just noodle and noodle and noodle. And it went on for nights. And Ridley I asked Ridley what he thought of it. I said, it's fascinating. It was really, you've never seen anybody do it before. So it was very unusual. Of course, he did bring in a couple of people to do some vocals, some that are in the film. Rachel's theme, which I really wish they had put in the movie, with Mary Wells, who did, those were the days, my friend, we thought they meant. She's the one that does Rachel's theme, if you ever get the full soundtrack that they put out. But yeah, Vangelis essentially improvised.
And really quickly, if you look at the deleted and alternate scenes in the special edition box sets or whatever, the alternate opening titles in that is what Vangelis actually scored to. Because if you watch everything he did is absolutely in sync with each drop of water that falls in that alternate title scene. So if you want to see kind of a small glimpse of Vangelis' process, watch that.
Yep.
I don't know if you can bring up that slide you had of Joanna Cassidy when she's standing there in Zora outfit.
Well, I no.
Okay, you guys all remember that though, right? Anyway, could you talk a little briefly about between the theatrical cut and then the director's cut, a couple of the shots that had to be redone in order to.
Yeah, the final cut.
Yeah, the final cut.
Yeah, Joanna, when I interviewed her for Dangerous Days, she was adamant, like, can we please do something to fix that scene? Because Lee Pulford, the stunt double, was really obviously in a different, very bad, not a bad way, it was just very different than Joanna's hair. And it was rushed and everything. So, Joanna begged me, and then I spoke with Warner Brothers and eventually Ridley. Ridley was not sure it was necessary to do it, but we kept, pressing him, please, let's give it a shot. And then finally one day, after some intense phone calls back and forth, we were down in Marina Del Rey with Joanna, and also Harrison's son, Ben Ford, who remouthed his dad's out-of-sync dialogue in the film. And probably really quick, on disc 5 of the box set, there's a piece called All Our Variant Futures from Work Print to Final Cut. That tells you everything. So if you want to see the footage of it being done and all that. But Joanna was great. She came back in, we brought her in, she put on the bra, the rain jacket, which wasn't needed, they just used the bra part of it, and she sat in a chair and basically moved her head and rotated around to match the same moments that the original footage had. And Rich Hoover directed that sequence, and it was Sony Picture Image Works and New Deal Studios, and it was just this great collaboration that brought that scene out of, I hate to say, a laughably ridiculous stunt double footage, because people laughed in the theater. It was, and it's such an emotional, sad moment. And I'm really glad we got at least take the laughter, the tittering laughter of the awkwardness of that footage out.
Yeah, and Joanna, actually, that was the original costume from 25 years earlier, and she still fit into it.
And they put a tattoo on her, like the same tattoo, and she actually then sat and did the Esper alternate version, and then Ben Ford had a scar put on his chin like his dad has, and he remouthed his dad's dialogue, so it was a really fun day, it was a geeky day.
Yes.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So we just talked about 2 of the 3 particularly egregious blunders in the original theatrical cut. So I wanted to ask about the original dub shot, and this would be a question for Paul and Charlie. Why was the original shot never completed, and just what happened?
It was a pickup shot that was done in London, and it was done actually on was it Shepperton? I think it was. Basically they had no time, and they were just said, well, it was an idea, let's see the dove go up in the sky. Unfortunately, it was daylight, and the background didn't match. It was done very quickly. At that point, money was very low. Ridley and Michael Daly were under a lot of pressure from the tandem people, which of course is Bud Yorkin and Jerry Parenchio, and so that's why it happened. It was just like, let's at least get it into the movie. But Charlie, fixed it. Charlie, and of course, the effects guys fixed it.
And if you look at the deleted scenes, again, we show a version of it before the final cut version, because they did another, actually before even the bad version. There's one at night, and it looks like a building in LA somewhere that I think they just went out, shot it, and it was not particularly cinematic, but it was another, basically what you saw in the theatrical cut, the daytime, kind of aluminum sided building, that was their second attempt at trying to do that shot. So Ridley took, when we started talking about fixing that shot, he took the original bad shot and he got a pen and started doodling on top of that on a printout of it. And then the visual effects team just kind of said, let's try to match that. And David Snyder, David Dreyer, one of the effects supervisors, David Dreyer, was in to really supervise that shot because he really had, he really wanted to make sure that shot was perfect. So he came in and came up with like 6 or 7 different possible matte paintings, like digital backgrounds and things, and then Ridley picked the one he liked.
I just wanted to say, I remember you in all of your Variant Futures, you talked about when you drew something, and you kept like the original art of the building, so subconsciously it was still the original shot.
Yeah, I was doodling it in a meeting, and I did like a doodle of what it could be. And then I was on vacation one time with my laptop in Mexico, and there's like this beautiful clouds and sky, and I took that sky, took it into Photoshop, created my own version of it, showed that to Ridley, then really added onto that. So it was kind of a nice riffing back and forth on the
the
sky.
attention to detail, thanks. Thank you.
Okay, so we're really getting squeezed for time, but 1 or 2 more. But let me tell you again, I'm sure all 3 of us would be more than happy to talk to you over in the autograph thing at your leisure. So when we're done with this, so go ahead.
Okay. My dad can't be here, but he had a couple of Philip K. Dick questions.
Yeah.
Mostly about
how we felt about the exclusion of the whole mechanical animal element from the story, particularly to do with, really interested in the book and Tyrell's owl and the whole owl animal, maybe the symbolism, the mechanical owl thing going on. And also, heard a rumor about something Philip K. Dick withholding some kind of rights or approval based on he wanted to have a dinner with Harrison Ford. I don't know if that's
There are a lot of rumors out there. In a nutshell, David and I were talking about this very quickly. I knew Phil for 10 years. And, you know, it's been really fascinating to watch a human being turned into a god, you know, in the time that he's, passed. But Phil was he was a complex, interesting, incredibly well-spoken, articulate, warm, and funny man. He didn't have a third eye in the middle of his forehead, okay? But in terms of Blade Runner, he spent the entire production hating him. He used to call me up and say, "How's Roadrunner doing?" I'd say, "Look, you have a standing invitation to go to the set. They're doing an incredible job." "Well, they're not shooting my book." And I said, "Yes, but it's true to the spirit of your book. And if anyone should know about adaptations, never follow the source material, it's you." Because Phil had actually worked in media before this. He had done some radio scripts and some very early TV things. So he kind of knew how this worked. But he was adamant about not liking the screenplay, not liking this, not liking that. And then when he finally got picked up in a limo at the end of the post and went over to EEG's screening room with his girlfriend Mary at the time, and sat and watched 10 minutes of the Red Dot Reel with Ridley, Joanna Cassidy, David was there, and he called me before he went and said, "Paul, should I go and see this?" And I said, "Of course you should see this." And Phil said, "They're going to send a limo, and I'll screw them. I'll show them. I'm going to use this limo to go out shopping all day after this." This is a true story. And so he's going, "Well, I'm going to suffer through this." A few hours go by, I get a call from him. He's going, "I can't wait to get a Deckard action figure." True story.
Thank you.
Last one, and then we're going to go.
Thanks. Ridley Scott was a big fan of Jean Giraud, the Mobius, the French comic book artist.
Correct.
And actually, Rutger Hauer indicated that that's how he was cast, through their shared love of his work. I was wondering how that may have affected some of the art design work and stuff like that.
Well, go ahead. Mobius.
I mean, in the beginning, that was the look, and then when Sid Mead came along, everything turned upside down. So all the wonderful work that Mentor Hubner had done and the stuff that came from heavy metal was kind of set aside. And you can even see some of the influence in Mentor Hubner's drawings, especially in the wardrobes, like heavy metal stuff. But once Sid Mead came along, and then we realized, okay, we're going to have to build all this stuff. I think that we left everything aside and started with Sid and stayed with Sid. And remember, this is in 1981. Every drawing had to be made with pencils on paper, and the drawings were like 30 inches by 40 inches maybe, and it took days and days and days to create all these sets. So with that in mind, knowing they had to be drawn by hand and had to be built at some point, you just stop designing and you just take it from that point, you just build. Otherwise, if there's a bunch of paper, then there's no sets to shoot. It just has to be done. It's a lot of pressure. And it's exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. That's all I can tell you.
Okay, well, listen, thank you all so much for Before you go, I want to give one last shout out to you, okay?